Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining Well Stewards on this webinar today. Paul and I have been discussing the importance of accountants during this COVID-19 crisis. And Paul refers to the accountants as the frontline workers for businesses. You're performing triage for the businesses right now and navigating them through this storm. We wondered, what could we do to help you accountants? Well, we thought, who is the best person we know to assist accountants during this difficult time? Chris Frederiksen, full stop. I reached out to Chris and asked him how he was doing, and he responded, Peggy, I was born for this time. I'm helping clients in so many ways. He was pumped. As many of you know, no one is more passionate than Chris about the accounting profession. He has the unique ability to encourage and fire up accountants better than anyone I know. I asked him if he would consider sharing his experience with us, and he did not even take a breath. Yes, when can we do this? So here we all are. But before I do a brief introduction of Chris, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping rules. One, we will be taking our questions at the end of this presentation, and you can ask them by pressing the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Secondly, you will be receiving a PD certificate from us for this 1 hour for practice management. Thirdly, the webinar is being recorded and you will be sent it after the presentation. So it's not that Chris needs any introduction for the majority of you. Chris is a CPA and is president and CEO at Frederiksen & Co. He's the author of several books, for example, How to Build a $1 Million Practice, How to Manage a $1 Million Practice. The New Business Kit, a comprehensive guide to tax, accounting, and regulatory aspects of running a successful business. The Accountant's Direct Marketing Kit. Chris is a sought-after speaker at many an accounting conference in the United States, England, Australia, and Canada. His strategic advice, whether it be technology, marketing, or service offering, has been pivotal to many accountants. Chris is going to share what he's been doing through this crisis to help clients with their respective businesses, while at the same time increasing consulting fees in his own firm. I'm excited to hear what Chris is going to share today, and it's with great pleasure that I hand over the mic to someone I am honored to call my friend. Chris, take it away.
Thank you, Peggy, and I'm really excited to be on this call with many of my very good friends across Canada. As many of you know, I was born and raised in the UK, and I came to the US when I was 18. I feel a great affinity for Canada, and I was born for this. I had a client call me the other day and said, how are you doing? And expecting me to get into the usual miserable conversation that most people are having about the fact that times are tough and all of this nonsense. I said, I was born for this. I'm having the best time of my life. Because what I do for a living is help clients be really successful. And that's what we all do as professional accountants, as CPAs and chartered accountants. When we come home at night, we say, what I did today was I really helped a client. If I hadn't been there, it would have gotten all messed up. So I'm really excited about that. And I just want to let you know that I have been able to get government financing for every single one of our clients. In fact, I found out yesterday that 2 of our major clients have been double funded. So unfortunately, we'll have to give the money back. But that was because what we did was we went in and we filed multiple applications for all of our clients, because we knew that the bureaucrats would really mess things up. So if you go to the next slide. We are absolutely uniquely qualified, as Paul was saying, we're the frontline workers for business. And the reason we're so important is because we're unemotional. We tend to be rational and calm. And when everyone is running around saying the world is, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, we're the ones who calm things down, and we tend to be fact-oriented. If go ahead. We all listen to the experts on a daily basis, and I just want to say that it really doesn't matter. I was reading the New York Times this morning, and what they're saying is that if you eliminate the city of New York, the number of coronavirus cases in the US is actually increasing, actually is accelerating. I don't know how it is in Canada because I'm not following the Canadian statistics, but I assume it's probably similar. So it doesn't really matter what's happening. Our job is to prepare our clients for the worst. So what I'm doing is saying to clients, hey, this is different than anything that's been before. This is different than the Great Depression. This is different than the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. What we've got is we've got a double whammy where we're having the Great Depression and the 1918 Spanish flu were all happening at the same time. So I personally expect it to get a lot worse. And I expect the unemployment rate, at least in some places, to get to maybe 30%, which would actually be worse than the Great Depression. One of the really interesting aspects of what's going on is in the work at home, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. It's going to be a long time before this thing gets settled. So if you're like an airline or a cruise line or a travel destination, it's going to be a very long time before that comes back. If we look back to the 2008, 2009 debacle, it took about 4 years for the airline industry to get back to its pre-recession levels, and this time I believe it will be worse. And because so many of us have been working at home and getting pretty good at it, I think there's going to be some fundamental changes to the economies. And so what we're doing is, for planning purposes, we're working with our clients using a roughly 18 months timeline, because we think that probably by then we will have some sort of a vaccine solution that's going to be workable. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, yeah, I was going to say the thing I missed most about will miss most about the coronavirus is the nightly comedy show we get from the White House. It's absolutely hilarious. I don't know if any of you watch this, but it's better than Seinfeld. First of all, you get Trump coming on in a long monotone reading his script, which he apparently has written himself, followed by the experts getting up and basically contradicting almost everything he says. So it's absolutely insane to believe that you'd have a leader of a great nation suggesting that we inject ourselves with bleach, that sunshine will kill anything, recommending all kinds of unsafe drugs, and basically encouraging some sort of rioting, encouraging people to go to their local governmental state house and demand that the economy be opened. So it's just astounding how political this whole thing has become. So what's our client's expectation? Well, first thing, they want regular communication. And what I have been doing is calling all of my business clients at least once a week And I tell you, the amount of appreciation for the communication is just amazing. And what we have the opportunity to do right now is cement these relationships that will last for the next 30 years. If you don't communicate with your clients, they're going to be getting their information elsewhere. But it's clear that they're scared as hell. They're really stressed. And they're worried about all kinds of things. They're worried about their future. They're worried about their retirement. But the thing you've got to do is make sure you don't buy into their stress. It's not your stress, it's their stress. And only by staying out of their stress can you really be effective. My favorite songwriter is Chris Christopherson, and my favorite song of his is Help Me Make It Through the Night. And this is just the last verse, but this is what I'm reminded of with the coronavirus. Yesterday is dead and gone, and tomorrow's out of sight. Lord, it's bad to be alone. Help me make it through the night. And I'm giving that to you as your mantra in dealing with what's going on in our society and what's happening with our clients. They're looking to you to help them make it through the night. How do you manage stress? Well, one of the things I learned early in my career is when bad things happen, most people react. You know, when someone screams at you or someone does something nasty to you, the temptation is to react. And what I want to ask you to do is, when something bad happens, like what's happening now, you don't react to it. The key to it is to figure out how to respond. And this is what you want to teach your clients, not to react in the moment, but to take time out to think about what's really happening and then figuring out, how do I respond to this? Now, the first area we're going to look at is government programs. And I assume that you are doing everything you can to help your clients in this area. And one of the websites that Peggy led me to in Canada that I would strongly recommend is a firm called Bateman Mackay LLP. And they have a wonderful website, and they have all kinds of good data on there about the different assistance programs available in Canada. And I'm following the legislation, and it seems like every day you're getting a new program or a new update. So I'm assuming that we're doing everything we can with our clients to make sure they're getting all that government assistance. And we're really bearing down on this and making sure that our clients do it. And if they're not doing it, we're the ones who get in there and make sure that they do it. I'm going to take a moment on the next slide to just talk to you a little bit about the government loan programs here in the USA. And that is because many of you have clients that operate in the USA. And even though they may be foreign companies operating in the USA, you're still entitled to look to these programs. The first program, and the most prolific, is the Paycheck Protection Program, which we obviously abbreviate to PPP. And we had an initial tranche that came out in April. We had a second tranche of another $400 billion that came out about a week ago, and that second tranche is just closing, and there inevitably will be a third one. Basically, under the PPP program, it is designed to underwrite payroll. And what you do is you take the last 12 months of payroll and you divide that by 12 to get the average monthly payroll, and you multiply that by 2.5, and that's the amount that you're entitled to. And once you get the money, provided that you spend the money basically on payroll for the following 8 weeks, you will then apply to have that amount forgiven. I have 4 companies that I run, and I've gotten money for all 4 of them. And you're allowed to spend 1/4 of the money on other than payroll, but very specifically rent or mortgage payments, interest on pre-existing debt, and a couple of other items. But that's a fantastic program. We started to apply through the big banks like Bank of America and Wells Fargo Bank, and they turned out to be an absolute disaster. I have 8 phone calls in to different people at Bank of America over the last 2 weeks, and it's just complete radio silence. So what we did was we reached out to a lot of smaller banks, and they've been fantastic in helping our clients get the money. But if any of you need help with that, you're more than welcome to call me, and I'll be more than happy to assist you. The second program, which is actually a program that's been around for the last 30 years, is called the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, which we call EIDL, which seems like a very unfortunate name. But this is where you can go in and apply for up to a couple of $100,000 for smaller companies, and you will get a 30-year loan at about 3% interest available. But it's going to take a long time because it takes a long time to process it. If I go back to the Paycheck Protect, if you go back a slide, if you go back to the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP program, that if you don't spend the money on payroll, and you therefore don't get it forgiven, but it now turns into a 2.5-year loan at 1% interest with no payments for 6 months. So it's a fantastic program. Again, if you have any of your companies with U.S. operations, we'd be delighted to help you. So on the next slide, we want to talk about planning and budgeting. And what we've been doing with each of our clients is putting together, using a basic Excel spreadsheet, is putting together a plan for them with multiple scenarios. And obviously what we're doing is building the one that is expected case, and then we're looking for a better case, and then we're looking for a disaster scenario. And we're helping clients do that because that's what they need in order to be able to make decisions. And we're generally updating these models on a weekly basis as facts in the marketplace become clear. Next, let's talk about terminating employees. I am helping clients do this. And what we have to be careful of is using the correct terminology. Layoff is actually not a technical term in any legislation, but it suggests that you're going to take the people back. The second term that's being used a lot is furlough. And furloughing suggests that it's a temporary layoff and you're going to bring the people back. And the third one, which is a technical term in law, is terminating. So I'm recommending to people that they use the term termination so that they don't get locked in a situation where people will contend that they were promised that they'd be brought back. without being unduly nasty, this is an awesome time to terminate people that you don't really want to have in your company or in your client's company. It will be, I think, very difficult for clients to claim any kind of improper termination when we're battling this coronavirus. We've been dealing with the lawyers who specialize in this kind of thing are really busy at the moment, helping us, and we're consulting regularly with them to make sure that we're doing everything according to the law. My recommendation when I'm talking to clients is, look, cut once and cut deep. What you don't want to do is terminating clients sequentially, because then your morale suffers. So what you want to do is to go in, cut the people that you need to cut, and then meet with the rest of your employees and say, look, we have no plans for any further terminations. This was something we had to do to save the company. It's rather, I use the analogy of the captain of a lifeboat, where you got too many passengers in the lifeboat and the whole lifeboat's going to sink. What do you do? It's the same decision that that physicians are making every day in hospitals, is when you don't have enough ventilators to go around, what do? Well, you save the people who are most likely to make it. But do talk to all of your clients right now about terminating employees. You can always bring them back or offer to rehire them, but you can bet your bottom dollar that we're going to have a very high level of unemployment. Again, I expect it to be as bad as the Great Depression, so there's going to be no shortage of opportunities. Next. The next thing that you can help your clients is in dealing with their suppliers. And what happens in most companies is that they don't do this early enough. When you can see that you're starting to run out of money, the worst thing you can do is go bury your head in the sand. So I believe it's your job to get with your clients and figure out what the cash flow is going to look like for the next 18 months, and then figure out which suppliers you can pay and which one you can't. So my advocacy is to communicate hard and communicate early. Tell the suppliers the hard and nasty truth and do it early. And then what you want to do is communicate regularly with your suppliers. In fact, with many of my clients, I'm helping them do that on a weekly basis, because the one thing that suppliers want is regular communications. And the other thing I advocate is that you send a small payment every week, because as long as people that you owe money to get a little bit of money on a regular basis and know that you're trying your best, they will generally back off and be helpful. The other thing I think you need to promise people is that you're going to be even-handed. So you're not going to pay one person and favor them over another. So let's go to the next slide, because what I've got for you here is a sample letter. Now, let me set the scene for you. I have a client that is in the wine distribution business, and for sake of argument, I've called them Niagara Wine Company. Now, where we are in California is that all of a sudden, restaurants were shuttered immediately. That was one of the early things to happen in coronavirus. So here I've got a client whose principal customers are restaurants, and they're sitting on $1 million of receivables from restaurants, all of whom are shuttered. And in fact, one of the biggest restaurants, most famous restaurants in California, wrote them a letter as soon as they were shuttered saying, we're not planning on making any payments to anyone until at least August. So here's the letter, and you can use it as a template. We want to update you on the current business environment here. The first months of 2020 were very promising, and then we were hit with the devastating effects of coronavirus. And you can see you can read the letter for yourself. So we're given the blunt truth that it's probably going to get worse. So the second half of the letter is now up in front of you. The first thing we want to do is tell clients, or tell suppliers that we're doing what we can internally. So we immediately took several painful steps. We laid off people, we took on more responsibility, and everyone has taken a substantial pay cut. I think that's important to tell suppliers. And then we say we can't continue operations. If you want us to distribute wine, we need to delay payments. So what we did was we actually froze the payables for an entire month, and then moved to make payments on a twice monthly basis as a percentage of the amount owed. And then we said we appreciate your cooperation, and we weather this storm together. That's an important phrase. And believe it or not, we had, this went out to about 30 wineries, and 29 of them were very cooperative, said we understand what's happening, we appreciate you telling us exactly what's going on. And we only had one winery that called up and spewed all kinds of venom on the client, but eventually the winery calmed down, and we said, we're not going to treat you any differently than anyone else, and take it or leave it. So that's dealing with suppliers. The next thing you can help clients with is dealing with landlords. And I've actually found landlords being really receptive. When I go to them and say, look, you can't expect us to be paying rent for premises that we do not have access to. And so the landlords have generally been very cooperative, either in abating the rent, i.e. giving us free rent for a while, or delaying the rent, where we say, look, we'll tack it on to the end, we'll pay you on a delayed basis. And the phrase I want you to practice using is force majeure. Force majeure is a legal concept that there are things that happen out there, also known as acts of God, which are things that no one could have ever anticipated, and therefore allow people effectively to be let off the hook for obligations where there's no way they could satisfy those obligations. And this is a good example. So it's a good phrase to be using with people that you are dealing with or trying to negotiate with, and it will cause them to run off to Google to figure out what force majeure means, but you now know what it means. So your job, can call up your clients and say, look, what's happening with your landlord? Do you want us to be in touch? It's much easier for us to negotiate on behalf of a client because we're not emotionally involved. If it's the landlord dealing with a tenant, it's so back and forth. It'll get emotional. You know, we've been great tenants, and landlord said, yeah, but we've been great. We did all these tenant improvements, and it gets all emotional. When we get involved in it, it's just facts and figures. So let's talk now about dealing with lenders. And here's the famous phrase: if you owe 10 grand, it's your problem. If you owe the bank 10 million, It's their problem. And we have again been helping our clients deal with lenders, and we've been dealing with some of the big insurance companies, we've been dealing with some of the big banks, and generally, if you're upfront with them and keep them informed of what's going on, they will generally be pretty cooperative. In the last recession, I got myself into a horrible deal on a piece of property in Las Vegas, and by maintaining a very close relationship with the bank, and by finding a buyer for my property, even though it was a very steep discount, the bank was actually willing to write off about $750,000 in debt that I was otherwise personally liable for. But it was done because of maintaining close contact. As long as you tell them what's going on, they're usually going to be reasonably helpful. In the next slide, I want to talk to you about remote working. Hey, great survey came out yesterday. And what it has said is that the majority of people working at home do not want to go back to the office. That's the majority. I think we're seeing a major change in the way that we work in North America. And let me just read to you from the New York Times. I'll just talk about some of the benefits that people are discovering. Number one, less time on the road. People, once they discover they don't have to spend time on the road, it's like, why am I doing this? And especially when you're in heavily urbanized areas like Los Angeles or Toronto or Calgary, people have got really long commutes. It's not uncommon in New York or Los Angeles to commute an hour and a half each way. And people are saying, wait, I now got 3 more hours a day. Why the hell would I go back to the old system? The second thing we found is that we've actually seen an increase in productivity. I was talking to Jim Bork, who is a senior partner at Witham, a big firm on the East Coast with multiple offices. And they pay about $1 million a month in rent in their various offices. And he was telling me about looking at his partners and saying, why are we doing this? Why are we spending $1 million in rent when we can have people work at home and have increased productivity? It obviously improves the environment. People are reporting more time for physical exercise. So by not having to commute, they've got more time for fitness. They report better interaction with their kids. So I think it's a very exciting time, and I think we're going to see some fundamental changes. In our practice, we've had a couple of people working from home, and it seems to work just fine. The one thing I just want to bring up is there are some hazards to remote working. Obviously, with people working at home and working off their laptops, that you have increased security concerns. And one of the areas that I have become very involved in is cybersecurity. And I've actually been somewhat involved with a company that has built a solution specifically for accountants, where we are combining a number of programs, and it's relatively inexpensive. And I would just urge you to, if you would, to go check out www.cyber631.com, and you can see this solution. We have it in our practice. We have used it. We were able to shut down or resolve a major fishing expedition. So we've had it for a couple of years, and We have many, many CPA firms and CA firms that are using this solution. So go take a look. On the next slide, what I want to suggest to you is right now, people are very concerned about their money and their ability to retire with dignity. If you've heard me over the years, you know that I am an absolute believer in wealth management. I believe that that is what we should be doing. We should be helping our clients manage their wealth so that they can retire with dignity. And this is a conversation I have with every one of my clients. Now, whether they ask us to help them or whether they have others to help them, I think we have a responsibility to help them with planning for their retirement. We need to help them with their investing. We need to help them figure out an estate plan. We need to help them figure out disability. We need to help them figure out, what happens in terms of long-term disability. Should they have long-term care? What are they doing about their kids and making sure their kids get educated? What are they doing about special needs where they have parents perhaps that will need to go into care? These are all things that I believe we are absolutely need to do. And you have plenty of opportunities for how to figure this out. And I'm hoping that my good friend Paul Tyers, who of course runs Wealth Stewards, will talk to you a little bit about the opportunities that he can offer you. And he's been doing this a very long time. And he is, in my opinion, the absolute ultimate authority on wealth management and client care for accountants. I've said it before, I'll say it again. In my opinion, it's absolute malpractice for accountants not to offer wealth management. I think it is one of the things we should be doing, and our clients absolutely love it. There is no time in history where you would have a better opportunity for talking to you about this. And on the next slide, I'll embellish that with saying this is also a time for estate planning, and you tie estate planning together with wealth management. And now is the time to say to your clients, look, we've got coronavirus felling people by the tens of thousands. And in fact, I was reading this morning that if you eliminate New York City from the US statistics, the number of coronaviruses is increasing day by day. It's accelerating, and there is in fact no flattening of that curve. It's just that New York skews the statistics to make it look like the curve is flattening. But if you eliminate that one city, it's still accelerating. So it's time to remind clients about the things they've been procrastinating about. They don't want to think about mortality, but now's the time to talk to them about it. So I'm talking to my clients about updating their will, and I'm getting them to agree to that. Updating their estate plan, and they're agreeing to that. And so I'm creating all kinds of introductions for my lawyer friends, creating work for ourselves, but creating a lot of work for lawyers. And believe me, that's going to come back and benefit me once we move through this. So from an estate planning standpoint, there's never been a better time to get with the program. And I believe the next slide is my last one. And I just want to reiterate, you were born for this. So for heaven's sakes, get off your asses, pick up the phone, and start dialing for dollars. And with that, I'd like to take the opportunity to encourage you to contact me anytime you want, and I'm more than happy to talk. I won't charge you for it. And at this point, I'd like to pass the baton back to Peggy and to Paul Tyers.
Thank you so much, Chris. I I do have a couple, and Paul's going to start here, and then I'm going to talk to you about some questions that we've received. Okay, Paul.
I find there's a certain irony in being on this because Chris Frederiksen and I were together when 9/11 happened. And that doesn't mean that every time we get together, there's some major calamity, but I find it interesting. He and I were doing a cross Canada tour at the time of 9/11. And guess what? We made it through that, as did most of the business people that we deal with. You know, I'm an accountant myself, but I'm not in public accounting. And I have to say that just the value that is being added to clients' affairs by their public accountants is absolutely extraordinary. I'm writing an article for the Globe and Mail that's going to be submitted this weekend, and it's going to be on that very topic. We've interviewed 3 different CPAs in public practice. Got some insights that I hadn't even considered, but I think it's vitally important. Now, regardless of whether you're north or south of the 49th parallel, I can tell you that many of the issues are identical. And so what we've done is we've sort of looked at, well, what are the needs of clients of CPAs? And we came up with sort of a broad categorization. Shelby, if you could advance that, please. And we think that there are going to be a lot of people who, given this situation, saying, you know, I'm done. I've had a great run, but I think there are a lot of baby boomers who may be saying, you know, at this point in time, I'm not really willing to sort of re-engage and invest a lot of my time and capital. So if you would just advance the slide, please. We think that there's going to be a lot of work in exit planning. Now, exit planning doesn't mean for a minute just giving things away, but it's a logical way to look at, can I afford to? And then how do you go out and make sure that your business is in as good shape as attractive for those people who may be buyers? We think the business brokerage will be needed. Absolutely financial planning to make sure that people are making the best use of their resources. And of course, wealth management, which to me is more the money management part once they've been exited. Very important because many clients are quite adept. They've had years of running their business with their hand on the tiller. But when it comes to moving those assets into public investment markets or even private investments, they're extremely uncomfortable. Undoubtedly, we're going to see tax rates increase or some other form of government actually trying to recover from some of the capital that they've invested. And we think there's going to be a lot more focus on proactive tax planning, not just tax preparation, but tax planning on a go-forward basis. Next slide, please, Shelby. Now, out of those people who decide to stay in business, and this got brought to the attention in a discussion, just a fine accountant, Eric Spiegel, that I spoke with this morning, the idea is that whether it was 9/11 or whether it was 2001 and interest rates of 20%, there are those people who are thrivers, who are innovators, who say, it is what it is. We have to take advantage of this situation. And they really have made a decision likely to stay in business. And they're going to be looking proactively ahead. They're going to be innovators and so on. Next slide, please. We think for those people, there will be a series of services that they need that many accounting firms that are so busy doing what they already do may not have time to deal with this. But clearly financial planning, whether it's from a business standpoint of saying, are there any acquisitions possible? They may be in a position if they've got a fortress balance sheet to take out some of the competition. We think that they're going to be a lot more focused on managing things that they do have control over within their own, whether it's RSPs or other non-registered money. We think some of those thrivers are going to be looking at alternative borrowing situations. I happened to have a meeting with our commercial banking yesterday. We were waiting for the branch open and we spent half an hour. And undoubtedly, he said that as much as there will be an absolute need, this isn't the time that the credit departments are going to be looking too far, too favorably at a lot of alternatives. And let's face it, at times like this, it's where there's a need for somebody who understands business that can step up. We run a fund called the Stewardship Alternative Income Fund. We have made some interesting investments over the last few months, and already we're seeing some great opportunities that are coming out of this. I think more of that will happen on a go-forward basis. We also think that there's going to be M&A activity. After I left KPMG many years ago, I went into the M&A financing business, and I can tell you that with every major catastrophe, the thrivers, the entrepreneurs, will be able to capitalize on the circumstances. Next slide, please. And then, of course, next slide, there will be those people who are survivors who may not have the options of leaving or selling the business, but they're going to be working really, really hard for a long time, and it's probably going to take them years to recover from this. Naturally, they're going to need some of the cash flow planning that Chris referred to. They're going to need restructuring agreements. We now have in-house legal counsel in our firm, and just this morning was an example of being able to put together some financial arrangements. We had the CPA on the line. I was on the line because we're trying to separate with some a holding company that just has assets in it, and we were able to put a restructuring agreement. A term sheet was tabled, and that restructuring agreement will be done by Monday morning and allow them to carry on. So by being able to really coordinate here, we find that we're able to help people considerably. Next slide. One of the things that Chris alluded to was the idea of communication. And for the last 7 weeks, we've been running a weekly webinar called Your Guide Through the Storm. And it was really an opportunity to put about a 15 to 20 minute webinar together. And we were in our world, we're talking to them about a range of things like the public markets. We talked to them about estate planning, a whole bunch of things like that. Our business is integrating financial planning and wealth management with CPA firms. And boy, has this coronavirus crisis ever driven home the need to work hand in glove together. I am so proud to say that the people that we have worked with are the frontline workers. We're not the frontline workers to the extent that CPAs are, but by working hand in glove, we're able to meet some of the needs that you see on the right-hand side. At the bottom, estate planning. Just to give you an example, there's no question that there's been a bump up in the desire to get wills and powers of attorney in place. We have another lawyer who works in-house with us, and we're literally able to do that online, walking them through an estate plan, completing a lot of the documents, PDFing that information over to legal counsel, and being able to do things at a fraction of the cost that it would normally take. Again, better use of technology than we were ever in a position to before. Next slide, please. Now, we wanted to give everybody the opportunity to ask questions. I think Peggy's going to introduce this.
I have a couple of questions here, but first of all, there's a comment from a friend of yours, Chris. Harold Johnson said, Chris, much of what you taught us over the years rooted us to be out there early for our clients. And that's happened in the last 7 weeks. However, we learned something new today and we'll implement it. So thank you so much on behalf of himself and Anna. So even, doesn't matter when we listen to Chris, he's always got something for us. But here are a couple of questions that have come in. So you mentioned about cash flow analysis, Chris, and we've heard that many times within the accountants that we're using and dealing with. And in the cash flow analysis, are you using a specific program? And if so, would you like to share what the software program is using it, or are you just doing it yourselves?
Yeah, we're just doing it in Excel because what we found is that every client is sufficiently different from the next client that I think it's more helpful to design something on a custom basis. And also it demonstrates to the clients that we're not trying to put them in a box. We're trying to do something very customized to just them.
Okay. And then the next question, of course, it's always around billing, and this is this is new for all of us. So how are we charging for this consulting services, by the hour or value billing?
A bit of both. I'm actually doing almost all of it by the hour, and my charge rate is $500 an hour. And I'm just telling people, you know, take it or leave it. I have not found any pushback at this point. People so desperately need this help. And the feedback I get from my clients is, wow, you've really added value. You know, you really came through for me when I really needed it. And I said, I was born for this. What's next, Peggy?
Okay, and we've got a couple of people who are talking about commercial lending, that they feel it's closed right now. What are the options? Paul, you've mentioned some. Chris, what are you doing? Where are you finding in terms of commercial lending? What are you did mention the smaller banks. Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, we're going to smaller banks, but we're also going to alternative lenders also. And most of the bankers, if you know your bankers well, if you've done the investment in relationships with bankers over the years, which we've done, they are usually quite happy to suggest alternative sources of finance. And everyone's different. But the whole point is you've just got to get in there and help your clients. And you've got to communicate. Call them up, find them out what they need, what they think. Again, with your cash flow projections, you're going to know what their needs are.
If I could weigh in on this, because some of the work that we did, and when I left public accounting, I was involved with commercial lending. And I want to tie that together with my conversation with senior account manager from the National Bank yesterday. As he said, communication with them is key. And for those clients, they are in the business of lending money. And if they can secure themselves with some good assets, if they don't believe that they're not taking an inordinate risk, they are prepared to step up and try to get the credits through. However, he did caution and say, very naturally, just given the whole uncertainty about their own loan loss provisions, you know, they're probably looking for higher credit quality. As the conversations we had is the combination of alternative lending as well as the senior banker. And I've referred to, I tell you that we do work in conjunction with factoring companies. One, Cortland Credit, is the former head of Ontario Teachers Pension Fund fixed income area, is the senior manager, where he owns Cortland Credit, and they are very much quality credits and actually lending money against receivables, and then they're systematic to over cash flow that's coming in. There is no doubt this isn't the time to be negotiating what we've been able to see. Usually access to capital and timing of getting that capital is an essential component of this. I can tell you that secondary lenders are also going to be likely looking for either equity participation or some type of bonus if things work out well. That goes with the territory. Naturally, people have to evaluate that, but it's not going to be cheap credit, but it often will be available. So if anybody has any questions on that, I know a number of sources. I think the next slide is going to point out how I can be reached. And again, like Chris, happy to help in the Canadian market. BDC is another example of those who are available for credit at this time.
If I could jump in, if one of the other things that I'm doing personally is I'm refinancing my house. And again, not because I need to, but because the interest rates are so incredibly low. And I'd rather have the cash in my bank than in someone else's bank. So again, it's a way of just ensuring ongoing liquidity. So I would recommend you talk to clients about that also as a good possibility.
Okay, so with that, I want to thank you, Chris, once again. The sample letter was extremely valuable because I know that there are a lot of accountants on here who deal with restaurant suppliers and with restaurants. And so I think that offering that kind of guidance was really great. And just thank you for giving us the, an hour of your time during this very difficult crisis. And really appreciate it. And many of the people who have sent in, great to hear from you, Chris, especially those who are 2020 members. So thank you very much. And absolutely, if you've got any questions, forward them to Paul or I, and we will get them to Chris, or you'll be able to pick it up when we send you the recording, as you'll see his email on it. So with that, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.